Hi, Kay. How are you? I'll be with you in just a minute. Okay. Hi, Kay. You might be the only one here right now. I didn't want to take the time to share this out because it's late and we'll just have enough trouble getting things through. So if you will start sharing it for me, that will be a big help. If anybody else cares to tune in, that will be a big help. Thank you. And Kate says, I'm good, Joe. Hope you and Barney are good as well. Yes, we are good. I don't know that we learned very much from the debate, but we are good. Hi, Andy. How are you? Thank you for coming. Maybe we'll wait for another few seconds. Okay, thanks. Can you share it to the work team, Kay? And to the public purpose chat? Those shares will be good because everybody will hear about it then from them. Okay, thanks. I'm going to start because I think there's a lot to say. Okay. First, I think that from the mechanical point of view, that both sides had their effective moments. It was a relatively civil debate, certainly compared to the Trump, and Biden debate. I think Mike Pence was very effective at taking extra time, working those extra seconds in order to make his point. He was very strong at that. He was very strong at essentially delivering casual hits, casual charges, and piling those up. On the other hand, Harris was good at not getting engaged over minor things and picking her spots to come in on and to attack both Pence and the Trump administration. So I think both sides were effective at making certain points. However, as Kay just says, Pence lies as well as Rump. Yes, but he doesn't lie quite as often as Trump. So he tends to hide his lies. He tends to shade his lies in kind of, I wouldn't call it a Trumpian way. He shades his lies in the way Newt Gingrich did. He came up through that old school of politicians in the Republican Party. They're old school now. They were not as of the 1990s. But Pence got his training in those schools, and he learned his lessons very well. And he's very good at the running hit, the casual hit, while he's talking about something else. And I thought that he was effective at that. But Pence had a really, really tough job. And the tough job he had was due to the fact that he had to try to make, he's sneaking about it, exactly. He had to make a good case while defending the administration with one of the worst records, if not the worst record in American history. I mean, you know, on the economy, he's trying to defend a record that's nearly as bad as Herbert Hoover's record. And that, by the way, is threatening to become as bad as the Hoover record over the next 3, 4, 5 months, because they've refused to do anything about the economy. And we're getting into the thick of disasters that have not happened before now, specifically eviction disasters, hunger disasters, further illness disasters due to the fact that people don't have homes anymore, permanent job loss disasters. Hey, Rob, how you doing? I don't think I'm Toda, am I? I think I'm Yoda, right? Yeah, hi, Rob, how you doing? So, Kay says he ruined Indiana. Yes, that's why he got out of Indiana and became the vice president, because he ruined Indiana. And he knew his best chance to go further with his career was to grab and hold Trump tight as he could. And that's what he's done over 4 years now. But for Trump, he's been a very effective vice president, I think. Of course, he wasn't effective in managing the coronavirus, but I have to say that was probably not his fault. That was probably Trump's fault. Rob said, did you enjoy being lied to for an hour? No, I wouldn't say I enjoyed that. I did enjoy seeing the sparring back and forth. Okay, I think that if I can try to look at this from the standpoint of people watching the debate who are not really well informed, I think that Harris came out all right and probably had a slight edge. But I think that given the record that Pence had to defend, he did a much better job than Trump did in the first debate in defending the record of the Trump administration. I did take rather copious notes on that, so I'm going to share the screen. Well, I guess I'm not going to share the screen, okay, in this instance, because the notes are not in shape to read, but I'm going to consult my notes and make various comments based on those notes. So first of all, Susan Page said, she opened up, okay, by saying, I'm here to enforce the rules. But you agree to the rules? But as the moderator, I'm here to enforce the rules, and I'm going to do the very best job I can at enforcing the rules. Now, of course, some of the commentators afterwards, specifically Andrea Mitchell, who, of course, is very good friends with Susan Page by now, of course, complimented her on how well she did at as a moderator. I personally felt that she failed in her moderation job. She allowed Pence to take advantage, to go over time again and again and again, and she was ineffective in stopping him from taking as much time as he appeared to want or as much time as he appeared to need. There was even one situation where he must have gone a half minute to 45 seconds over time, and she was powerless to stop him. She was powerless to stop him. They really need to change the rules of the debates to give the moderator the ability to cut off the mics. They got to be able to cut off these people if they want to have a fair debate. Now, even though I think when we look at it, we're going to see that Pence got quite a bit more time than Harris, maybe 5 or 6 minutes more time than Harris all through the thing, and maybe even more than that. I still think Harris was effective in referring to the failures of the Trump administration. She pointed out in particular that the Trump administration was informed on January 28th concerning the nature of the coronavirus and how it spread and how it went through the air. So they pretty well knew at that point that a good way of stopping the virus, at least a somewhat effective way of stopping the spread or cutting down on the spread, would be masks. And yet, of course, as you know, the Trump administration resisted masking. They've resisted masking until this day. Harris asked people what the American people would have done had they known what the administration knew on January 28th. If the information had just been transmitted to them, what could they have done and would they have done to keep themselves as safe as possible? I thought that was a very effective question for her to ask, because it certainly would have cut down on the death toll considerably. Susan Page asked the question, why is the death toll here higher than that of any other country at our similar stage of development? She asked a question like that. Okay, and she contrasted us with our neighbors right across the border who have a death toll which she said is roughly 1/3, okay, of ours. The reason why I thought that was ineffective, or not as effective as it might have been, why I thought it was a little bit of a softball question, was because it wasn't numerical enough. It wasn't quantitative enough. She should have asked the question in terms of citing the U.S. death toll as of today. We know it's something like 650 fatalities per million. And that should have been contrasted with death tolls in nations that have managed the virus very well, not with Canada. Canada has not managed the virus that well compared to other nations, not compared to Taiwan. Taiwan's performance is 600 times better than Canada's. Now, the fact that it's by now 2,500 or 2,700 times better than the United States is really besides the point. The only real point is not what Canada has done, but what nations that have managed the coronavirus well have done. New Zealand could have been cited. Taiwan could have been cited. South Korea could have been cited. 4 or 5 nations should have been cited in that particular question to underline how terribly badly the Trump administration has done. So that was a question from Susan Page to Mike Pence. So Pence comes back and he says, from the very first day, Donald Trump has put the health of Americans first. Well, there should immediately have been a reply to that. If he's put the health of Americans first, why didn't he give them the information they needed to protect themselves against the virus from January 28th onward? Why didn't Kamala Harris reply on that? She did not. Pence said Trump stopped travel from China. That saved hundreds of thousands, of lives. Well, that saved hundreds of thousands of lives because Trump did nothing else, virtually nothing else to contain the virus. That's all he did. Now, deaths, fatalities could have been in the millions. That's true. But they also could have been as low as 100 persons. 100 persons. So anybody who really knows the situation comparatively across nations would find Pence's reply to be very ineffective, okay, very inadequate. But of course, for people who don't really pay attention to these things, yeah, stopping travel from China saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Pence moved on quickly to talk about vaccine development. But he didn't answer the question. He didn't answer Susan Page's question. Why is the U.S. death toll higher than that of any other country? Never answered that question. Why didn't Susan Page come back and say, hey, you didn't answer my question? Why didn't she stop him in the middle and say, you're not answering my question? I asked you why the U.S. death toll is higher than that of any other country at a similar stage of development. I'll be more specific now. Why is the U.S. death toll 2,700 times higher than that of Taiwan? Why didn't Susan Page hector Mike Pence there? I think she failed as a moderator because she didn't do that. So Pence kind of moves on and he says, well, to talk about Biden's plans for containing the virus, they seem to be a copy of the administration's plans. Now, Kamala Harris was supposed to respond to that. She didn't respond to what Pence had to say. She didn't respond in real time. She said something she had planned to say. She repeated that the administration's plan has not worked. 210,000 have died. And she asked a series of questions about how people could possibly keep calm when this was happening or that was happening or the other thing was happening. She even mentioned the fact, how can people keep calm when they can't find toilet paper? And so that was, I think that reply was somewhat effective. But the point being, other than stopping travel from China, what has Trump actually done that has been effective in containing the virus? Yes, Trump can talk about vaccines, but we haven't seen any vaccines. And 210,000 have died. She should have gotten in that 210,000 have died while replying to the BS about vaccines. And she, of course, could have responded by saying, hey, Mike, you didn't answer the question. The question is, why is the U.S. death toll so much higher than that of any other country? And that speaks to a weakness of Harris. Harris is weak when it comes to numerical citations during debate. She doesn't really remember numbers, except the most outstanding numbers. And she cannot respond in a quantitative way when she has to respond in a quantitative way. She tends to be very qualitative in her response. Now here she was fairly effective because that figure of 210,000 who have died is it's a figure everybody's really, really concerned about. It's a top line figure. You do have to give that particular figure, but you also have to give the figure of deaths per million because you can compare that across countries, and that allows you to show how badly the United States has done compared to other countries. She was unprepared to respond in that way. So I don't think that her response was very good on that. Okay. Mike Pence replied by saying, the American people will always be in our hearts, his and Trump's. And he attacked Harris for saying that the plan hasn't worked because millions could have died and only 210,000 have died by implication. And he also claimed that she's making light of all that Americans have done to fight COVID-19. Of course, that was bullshit. She never said anything about what Americans have done to fight COVID-19. She only said Americans could have done much better in fighting COVID-19 if Trump had given them the information they needed. So I thought that Pence's reply, was ineffective. I think it was ineffective. It won't go over with people. Not that. Susan Page then asked, how can the administration expect to take the necessary measures to fight COVID when the administration won't do it? Pence then replied by literally saying nothing in a word salad and talking about freedom. What did freedom have anything to do with? The necessary measures to fight COVID were not taken by the administration. Why not? Because of freedom? What did freedom? How about the freedom not to die? How's that? That's the freedom that really matters, isn't it? The freedom to keep on living. But Pence talked about the abstraction of freedom, talked about it in the abstract. We're always dedicated to freedom, making sure the American people always have freedom while they're dying in the hundreds of thousands. Yeah, that doesn't go over. Harris then accused the administration, of ineptitude and of not giving the information the American people needed. That was a good reply, but of course it would have been much more effective if she could have said something like, and I don't know if this figure is completely accurate now. I haven't looked at, for once, I didn't look at the totals for today. I think they're something like 650 fatalities per capita. If that figure is right, then we're somewhere, if we divide by about 3/10 of a fatality, where something like, if it was one, it would be 650 times. So it's something like 2,500 times is what it would work out to, that we've performed 2,500 times worse than Taiwan. If she could have cited that figure, which is very, very easy to get, that would have underlined, if she cited that figure and then she said, that's how inept your administration has been. You've performed 2,500 times worse than Taiwan. Because of your management, it was 2,500 times worse. Do you even know that you performed as badly as that? Do you even know? She could have looked into the camera and asked Pence, do you even know that you performed that badly? I don't think they know. I don't think they even know. I don't think Kamala Harris knows. She would have been much more effective if she could have said that. Susan Page then asked Harris whether she would take a vaccine. I thought Harris's reply on that was effective. She said, if Dr. Fauci and the scientists say to take the vaccine, that it's safe, and they're willing to say that it's safe, then she would be the first online to take it. But if Trump says to take it, then she would not. Then Susan Page asked Pence about whether he has, Pence, by the way, did not answer that. He did not take that on. Susan Page then asked Pence about whether he has a succession agreement with Donald Trump, since Donald Trump is so old. Has he talked over with Donald Trump what the plans are for him to replace Trump if he's incapacitated, or God forbid he should die, or whatever? Pence didn't answer that question. He moved on to make a claim about having a vaccine before the end of the year, which, of course, he wouldn't say we would have a vaccine before the election. He wouldn't say that. So he just said before the end of the year, so people have to vote, not knowing whether they're going to have a vaccine or not. On the other hand, if he said there would be a vaccine before the election, it would be easy to prove that he was a liar, because there isn't going to be any vaccine before the election. There's probably not going to be any vaccine before the end of the year. So he probably lied about that. It's up to people to evaluate whether they want to believe that or not. I just figure, it's another lie of this administration. And then he turned around, Pence did, and attacked Harris, accusing her of undermining faith in the vaccine. Why? Because she would not say we'll have a vaccine before the end of the year. Why? Because she was saying she didn't have any faith in Donald Trump. What she was saying is she didn't have any faith in a vaccine that was recommended by Donald Trump without any scientific validation or backup. That's what she was saying. Pence knows very well she was saying that. Everybody else knows very well she was saying that. So I think that Harris won that particular exchange. Pence then talked about the failure of the Obama administration in relation to the swine flu. They didn't do a good job in managing the swine flu. And Ron Klain has said, and by the way, they did do a good job, with Ebola, but they didn't do a good job with the swine flu. Ron Klain has said that their success in handling the swine flu was just due to luck. And so Pence successfully deflected some of that with respect to the swine flu. But after all, the bottom line is still there. We've lost, actually, it's now 215,000 people. We're at 650 deaths per million. So it's a terrible, terrible, terrible failure. Obviously, much worse than the Obama administration's failure about the swine flu. Much worse. I mean, the effort to compare the two is so out of the ballpark, It is ridiculous. But, I point out again, Pence did not answer the question he was asked. That pattern was repeated again and again throughout the same debate, Pence not answering the question. Susan Page, never called him on it. Kamala Harris never called him on it. Harris got the same question from Susan Page. So she started bullshitting about herself, and she started talking about values. Susan Page didn't ask about values. She asked about a succession plan. And that question applied equally well to Joe Biden, maybe more, because Biden is 4 years older than Donald Trump. Of course, he's probably now in a better position to survive because he doesn't have COVID. So lots of old people who get COVID, even if they don't die, even if they manage to survive, they have debilitating illnesses for the rest of their lives. The illnesses themselves would make them incapable of being president. So this question was a very relevant question. Page didn't press the advantage on this. She didn't point out that neither of the debaters answered that particular question. And she should have put it to them. She should have said, do you have an answer or not? Yes or no? And if you do, I'll give you 30 seconds to give me what the answer is. Stop with the BS. Answer the question. Susan Page then asks about whether either presidential candidate will release comprehensive information about their health. Pence answered with BS about how the president feels about his health care, that he got it all to read, and he implies that the Trump administration has been terribly transparent about the health record of Donald Trump, which everybody knows is a total lie. Then he congratulated Kamala Harris on her nomination. Harris then was asked whether she will answer the question, which of course Pence did not. And she starts talking about Trump's taxes. And she raises the issue of transparency about Trump's financial interests. Now that's an interesting question. It's maybe a good one to raise in passing, just to heckle Pence and Trump. But it doesn't answer the question. It doesn't answer the question about when Joe Biden is going to release comprehensive information about his health. Mike Pence then started talking in reply about Trump's taxes, but he didn't answer the transparency questions. He was cut off by Susan Page because he did not answer the question. And she wanted to go on to a new topic. In other words, her tactic was when they didn't answer the question, instead of calling them out on it, she would move on to a new topic. Andrea Mitchell, after the show, considered that an adequate response. I don't know why she considered it an adequate response. Might be that her mental capacity is starting to fail her. Maybe that's why. Jeez. Harris replied and said, Trump measures the health of the economy by how the wealthy are doing, while Joe Biden will measure it by how people are doing. Now, there are easy replies to that that Mike Pence could have made. I don't think he made the easy and obvious replies, specifically that Joe Biden, in his whole political career, has never measured the wealth of the economy by how people are doing, right? I mean, you never hear that from him by how regular people are doing. He generally doesn't talk about measuring the health of the economy at all. That's not his forte. And then she went on to say that Biden talks about doing infrastructure, and in contrast to Trump, who talked about infrastructure but never did anything, but that Biden is talking about it and is going to invest in infrastructure and is going to invest in people with free education for everybody who makes less than $125,000 a year. Talked about all the things that Biden would do versus the tax reduction for the wealthy that Trump did. And so Susan Page then asked Pence about whether he expects a quick recovery from COVID when the economy starts again. And Pence claimed that, well, the economy has been recovering quickly already, said that the average family had $2,000 in savings from tax cuts under Trump, which, of course, again, doesn't answer the question, because that was, if it was an accurate figure, and I have no idea whether it is, I think it was probably a lie, but I had no time to check it out. But even if it was accurate with respect to the tax cuts, that was pre-COVID and pre-collapse of the economy. Page is asking him a question about whether he expects a recovery that's going to be quick. And then Pence went on to talk about an income increase of $4,000 under Trump. There hasn't been an income increase of $4,000 under Trump now. Maybe before COVID there was an income increase of $4,000, but since COVID we've had a collapse of the economy. We got between 30 and 40 million people without jobs. We got 30 million people on unemployment, or 33 million people making unemployment claims right now. We have people on the point of eviction. They're not making 4,000 more than they were before Trump. That's ridiculous. Every time he has to answer a question on the economy, he talks about the pre-COVID thing. Anyway, Pence then talked about fast comeback of jobs since the COVID collapse. Of course, he doesn't talk about the jobs that have not come back. He doesn't talk about the immediate loss of more and more and more jobs that are coming because the Republicans have failed to join with the Democrats to pass a new relief bill. Anyway, the Pelosi's relief bill, her new one, her old one, neither of those were adequate because they didn't supply a basic income for the duration of the crisis. They didn't supply a Medicare for all program, at least for the duration of the crisis. They didn't supply protection against eviction for the duration of the crisis. They didn't supply protection against mortgage foreclosures for the duration of the crisis. They didn't supply any of this stuff. But even if we don't talk about that, even the inadequate relief bills put forward by Pelosi, the $3.4 trillion bill and now the $2.2 trillion bill, the Republicans, of course, refused to deal with either of those in good faith. And they're still doing it today. And just yesterday, before he backtracked, Trump put an end to negotiations. Of course, he ran away. As soon as the stock market collapsed, he backtracked as quickly as his cowardly little legs could carry him. Anyway, Pence accused Joe Biden of wanting to bring surrender to China back. Now, I don't think that's going to resonate very well with the American people. I don't think the American people really see things that way, that Trump has somehow saved us from a surrender to China. Harris said Joe Biden will not raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 per year. She said that is a fact. He has said that again and again and again. He said he won't end fracking, says Trump's economy is broken, which is correct, talks about Trump wanting to take away the ACA, which is certainly correct. I mean, he goes boasting about how he's going to have a better plan, than the ACA, how he cares about health care for Americans. He talks out of both sides of his mouth, but everything he does in action is designed to take the ACA away. He's been trying to do that for 4 years. Now, I don't love the ACA. In fact, I hate the ACA. I was always opposed to the ACA. I'm always for Medicare for all. I'm still for Medicare for all. But the fact remains, if the ACA is taken away, as Amy Coney Barrett would take it away, 20 million people immediately will lose their coverage. And there are an additional 130 million people who will lose their coverage when the insurance companies go after their pre-existing conditions. We're talking about 150 million people being on the bubble. If any of those people get sick, however many, let's say 7 million of those get sick with COVID, or 10 million of those get sick, with COVID, and they want the insurance companies to pay for their care. And note that Trump's care so far under COVID has already cost $100,000, which, of course, he didn't have to pay at all. But, so a regular person gets that same kind of treatment, gets a $100,000 hospital bill, and who pays for it? The insurance company says, hey, you had a pre-existing condition. You had COVID. It was a pre-existing condition. We don't have to pay for that. COVID's a pre-existing condition. They won't pay for it. Or you had comorbidities. That's why your COVID was so hard for you to get over. So we're not going to pay your whole bill. I mean, the insurance companies are going to slaughter people on that stuff. They're going to slaughter them on that stuff. I mean, the suffering is going to be incredible. The people are going to be in the streets. There aren't enough troops in the whole world to put them down. So Pence then said Kamala Harris was not entitled to her own facts. And he said Biden has said he will end fossil fuels. And he then touts Trump's promises for a great medical plan and attacks the ACA as a horrible plan, that nobody likes. Well, it's quite true that most people don't like the ACA, but it's not true that they prefer nothing to the ACA. They would rather have the ACA rather than Trump's non-existent plan. And they would rather have the ACA than have nothing while Trump tries to force through a non-existent medical plan that he hasn't even thought of yet. That's not even on the table yet. That is nowhere to be seen and nowhere to be talked of when he's had 4 years to put it forward. Susan Page says, then asks Pence about what the administration would do about climate change if they were returned to office. Pence says, we will continue to listen to the science. Come on. Trump continues to deny the science. Everybody in America knows that. Pence lies smoothly attacks the Paris Climate Accords. Suddenly starts to run to the left. The Paris Climate Accords are not good enough. We'll follow the science. But what's the science saying? The science is saying that global warming, climate change, is being caused by the emissions of greenhouse gases. That's what the science is saying. There's 99% agreement among the scientists on that. Trump is at variance with scientific opinion about climate change. And he needs to do something about it. Anyway, Pence also said that there were no more hurricanes today than there were 100 years ago. I don't know where he came up with that bullshit, but I remember when I was a kid, I remember the hurricanes that we had when I was a kid and how often we had hurricanes. Okay, maybe we had one hurricane a year, and there was never one we really had to worry about up in the New York City area. And I don't remember North Carolina getting flooded out all the time. And I don't remember Florida ever being underwater during those years. And I don't remember devastation in Louisiana. Okay, but of course, he might not be lying about that. If I look at the statistic, it might be that the number of hurricanes would be just about the same. So that technically it's not a lie. It might just be that they're so much more severe now. Anyway, Harris reiterated what Biden will do about fracking, specifically that he would not end fracking, which I don't believe Biden will end fracking. We're going to do everything we can to see to it that he does end fracking, because he has to end fracking, because fracking is terrible and adds to the greenhouse gases in the environment. Why do we want to frack oil and burn more oil and put more greenhouse gases into the environment and accelerate climate change? Why would we want to do that? But Biden doesn't want to admit that he's going to end fracking. So he has said he's not going to end fracking. Biden, I think, is probably lying about that. And if he's not lying about that, it's worse than if he's lying about it. So if he keeps his commitment, okay, it's even worse. Now, with respect to taxation, I certainly believe that Biden is not going to tax people more who make under $400,000 a year. I don't think that's going to happen. Okay. Now, maybe he should tax people more who make less than $400,000 a year. I mean, maybe he should move that down to $200,000. Maybe he should put in a cost of living adjuster, because the cost of living is so different in different areas of the United States that people in the expensive areas maybe should get a break in terms of when the taxing starts for them. It's easy to put in a cost of living adjustment with respect to the taxing. That's really not a problem. And that would be more fair and would make people who live in the expensive areas more comfortable with the idea of taxing people more, okay, who make more than $200,000. Now, do we have to tax these people for revenue? Of course not. We know we don't have to tax people for revenue. But it would be good to tax people who make more, because these people have been undermining our political system with all the extra money that they make. So for the sake of our democracy, we need to take the money away from them. Yes, it's time Biden started talking about that, but maybe not in a presidential debate to scare people out of their wits, or for Harris, okay, in a vice presidential debate. And then Harris cited Moody's, saying that the Biden administration will create 7 million more jobs than Trump's. Well, okay, I always believed that Moody's was maybe somewhat responsible in certain ways, but I changed my mind about that when Moody's around, was it 2011 or 2012, decided to downgrade the credit rating of the United States, okay, a monetary sovereign that could not possibly go bankrupt, from AAA to AA or something like that, on the questioning of the credit of the United States, or as one wag put it, Carlos Mucha actually, Moody's decided to tug on Superman's cape. That was ridiculous to question the credit rating of the United States, especially when the United States was not allowed in the Constitution to default on any of its debts. It was total and utter stupidity, and demonstrated that Moody's had no understanding of the financial system. Anyway, their models shows that the Biden administration is going to create 7 million more jobs than the Trump administration. I don't know exactly how they know that. I don't know how they compare policies, because I don't know what Trump's policies are going to be, okay, in the next few years. He hasn't said. I mean, Biden at least has a platform. Trump hasn't said how many million more jobs that he's going to create. If Biden decides he's going to do the Green New Deal right, instead of only spending $2 trillion over 4 years on it, if he decides that he's going to do it right, then he's going to end up creating 35 to 40 million new jobs, and not 7 million more jobs than Trump's. Anyway, Harris points out that Biden took science off the EPA website, and she accused the information of being anti-science, which, by the way, if there was ever a true charge made against an administration, I don't know what it could be. Susan Page asked whether climate change represents an existential threat. She asked this question of Mike Pence. Pence, again, didn't answer the question, but he did corner Kamala Harris on her previous support for the Green New Deal, support that Harris doesn't want to admit to right now, because the Green New Deal she was supporting was the Bernie Sanders Green New Deal, the one that was going to spend $16.3 trillion over 10 years. Harris did not want to admit to that, so he cornered her on her previous support for the GND, and let the implication rest that she was supporting Biden's Green New Deal, which is only $2 trillion over 4 years, only $500 billion additional per year. Okay, and Harris replied on jobs and pointed out that Trump's trade war with China cost 300,000 manufacturing jobs and many more other kinds of jobs as well, and says that the American people know what the reality is of Trump's economy and how many good-paying jobs were lost. Susan Page asked Pence to describe our relationship to China and to characterize China as whether they were an enemy or an adversary or a friend, or, you know, the usual drill. Are they an adversary? Are they an enemy? Are they a friend? Are they, you know? And Michael Pence answered by attacking Kamala Harris on NAFTA. I think Harris should have interrupted him at that point and quickly replied, "Hey, I was barely out of college when NAFTA was passed. What are you talking to me about NAFTA about? I don't support NAFTA. I'm not for NAFTA. I was never for NAFTA." I don't think he could tag her for NAFTA. Maybe he could, but I don't know. I never noticed that she had any particular opinion about NAFTA or trade. She probably does, because she's part of the Clinton bloc. So probably she did, but I don't know if he could nail her on that. He might be able to nail her sister, who worked for the Hillary think tank, the Center for American Progress, now run by Neera Tanden. But he did point out that she voted against the USMCA, and then he started touting the virtues of the USMCA, how great it was for labor. Harris did not reply, okay, to that. because she probably knows nothing about the USMCA and nothing about its provisions. There was plenty to attack Pence on that, but she didn't know how to reply, because when it comes to policy, Harris really doesn't know much. She really doesn't know much. She'll start laughing and acting like a fraternity girl if you ask her about policy. So Susan Page asked Harris about China. And Harris turned around and then accused the Trump administration of getting rid of the Obama-Biden administration pandemic team. And Pence says, he interrupted, he says, not true, not true. But it is true. Trump did that right at the beginning of the Trump administration. He dismissed the whole damn team. He tanked it. And it was a team that was experienced in handling pandemic and had learned a lot of lessons. And Trump had nothing to put in their place. When COVID came, he was not ready in any respect in terms of how to respond, because he didn't have that team to seek advice from. Then Harris says that Pew survey research shows that other nations hold President Xi and China in higher respect than Donald Trump and his administration. That's what's happened from 4 years of Trump, that we've lost the respect of other nations of the world. That is certainly true. If you care about the respect of other nations of the world, then what she says is true. The point that she was trying to make, though, is that foreign policy relationships with friends is very important. Susan Page asked Harris about relationships in foreign policy, and she said Trump has betrayed our friends and embraced our adversaries, and she cites what our intelligence community has told us. She didn't say very much about what our intelligence community has told us, and whether that is very reliable or not, but she mentioned it. Then she cited Trump blowing up the Iran nuclear deal, which certainly was a highly foolish thing to do. And Pence then replied by saying Donald Trump kept his word with Israel. And he also said, we've strengthened ourselves across the Asian Pacific. I think that is highly debatable. But he did cite our military success against ISIS, and he referred to someone in the audience who lost their daughter because the Obama-Biden administration was too slow in getting their daughter away from ISIS, that if they had just started their effort 2 days earlier, they would have gotten to her and she would have still been alive. And then Pence went on to talk about how breaking the Iran deal was good because the Iranians were doing this and that, which in fact they were not doing. And then he also talked about the killing of Soleimani, and he claimed that Soleimani was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans. That was a lie. We didn't lose hundreds of thousands of Americans anywhere in that area due to Soleimani. We haven't lost hundreds of thousands of Americans in that area at all. Okay? But the truth is that Soleimani, whose guerrilla forces fought alongside of us against ISIS in Syria, saved American lives, many more than he cost. And not only that, but Soleimani was a very high-ranking general in Iran. And we illegally attacked him in an international situation when he was a guest of the Iraqi government and we broke international law in assassinating him in that particular context. But, of course, Harris didn't want to reply about that. Maybe she didn't know about it. Maybe she doesn't know what happened. Maybe she doesn't know that Soleimani has worked alongside of us in many contexts and has saved American forces. I don't know if she knows that or not, because I don't know how much she knows about foreign policy. From her talking during the debates, I got the impression she doesn't know a damn thing about foreign policy. All she knows about, is criminal justice, and she hasn't done very good things there. Maybe she knows a little bit about the climate, and maybe she knows a little bit about how to debate, but I'm telling you, she has not impressed me as a very knowledgeable person when it comes to policy across the board. She's not very knowledgeable on healthcare. She's not very knowledgeable on the economy and fiscal policy. She's not very knowledgeable at all. She's an empty suit. Anyway, Pence cites success against ISIS. Oh, I'm sorry, I went through that already. So I stopped with killing Soleimani, so I'll go on. Harris answered about Iranian retaliation against our forces, and then he segued to a pattern of Trump, referring to our troops. Then she segued to there being a pattern of Trump referring to our troops as losers and suckers, and she attacked Trump for that. And then she segued to bounties and said, Trump has never brought up the issue of bounties on our soldiers with Putin. And she delivered that. And so Pence tried to reply, and Susan Page was impotent to stop him, but he was just giving a bunch of bullshit anyway, and I don't think he successfully answered what Harris had to say. So Page then punished Pence by shifting to talk about the ACB confirmation and what Pence would want to do about choice if he was still the governor of Indiana. I don't know why that would be relevant, because, oh, well, I guess it might be relevant if Pence would have become the president. Okay, so then it would be relevant. Trump ignored that question, and he talked about possible Democratic attacks on Amy Coney Barrett's Christian church beliefs. Mike Pence never answered the question. He deflected. Susan Page allowed him to deflect and to deflect successfully. However, I don't think Pence is on strong ground here, because I don't think that Amy Coney Barrett's background in terms of her Christian faith is something that's going to resonate well now in the context of COVID, in the context of an economy that is increasingly crashing. In the month from now until the election, the economy is going to be crashing all over because there's no relief. And there's no relief coming. And there's probably no relief coming until January sometime. And people are going to be grievously suffering. And I don't think they're going to care about Amy Coney Barrett's Christian belief, one way or the other. I'm sure Pence cares a great deal about that. But I'm also sure that in the present context, 90% of America isn't going to care a damn about that. But then Harris replied, and she said, Joe Biden and she are people of faith. And she points out Joe Biden would be only the second practicing Catholic of the United States, after John Kennedy, of course, who was the first. And she segues to the election now, the present state, of the election. And she then points out the context that we're in the midst of a pandemic, and Trump is trying to get rid of the ACA. And she talks about 20 million people losing coverage and people losing insurance due to pre-existing conditions. And of course, that was a good point, okay, to bring up, but it would have been more effective if she could have brought up the 130 million people who stand to lose their coverage when they most need it, because, and actually encounter situations where insurance companies refuse to pay bills because they have COVID or they have comorbidities or whatever. Susan Page asked Pence about his administration, saying he was going to protect people with pre-existing conditions. And then she asked him how that would be done by a new Trump administration. He didn't answer the question. Again, he didn't answer the question. How many times have I said that now? 6 times during this presentation? 6 times he didn't answer the question? And Susan Page didn't point out he didn't answer the question. Instead, he talked about being pro-life, and he talked about the right to life and the importance of the right to life. And then Pence attacked on whether the Dems are going to expand to the court. He turned around and asked Harris whether Dems were going to pack the court. And Harris chose to answer with an example from Abe Lincoln, saying that Lincoln declined to appoint a Supreme Court justice at the end of his the first term because it was too late in the term. I think she mentioned that Lincoln did this 27 days before the end of his term. And then Pence had the nerve to ask her to answer the question. I think in response to that, she could have said, very effectively, look, you have failed to answer 6 questions that were directed to you by the moderator already in this particular debate. Questions come from the moderator. They don't come from you. They come from the moderator to me, and they come from the moderator to you. So I don't have to answer your questions. But as it happens, okay, I'm going to answer your question. And the way I'm going to answer it is I'm going to point out how you Republicans have been packing the courts all through the Trump administration. I'm going to tell you about the Merrick Garland nomination before the administration, when the Republicans in the Senate denied to Barack Obama for a whole year a hearing for the justice he nominated. And now you're complaining because we don't want to give fair treatment a month before the election to your nominee, Amy Coney Barrett? What's fair about that? We're the ones with justice on our side. You're the ones who've been packing the courts. That's what she should have said. And she should say then, if we decide later to pack the courts in retaliation, fair is fair. It's only fair. Fair is fair. You've been packing the courts now for the last 10 years. You've been packing the courts wherever you could. You denied nominees for the lower courts to Obama. You would never confirm them in the last year of his term. You allowed those vacancies to remain so those appointments could go to Trump. I remember that. There was so much she could have said, but she's not that well informed on things. I don't think she's as well informed on things as I am, and she's a candidate for the presidency of the United States. Susan Page then points out that Breonna Taylor was killed and asks Harris if Breonna has gotten justice. And Harris says no, then talked about the George Floyd murder and peaceful protests afterwards and being a part of them, and says bad cops are bad for good cops, and talks about what the Biden administration would do, including the legalization of marijuana. That's a pretty effective response. Page posed the same question to Mike Pence, and he says the family of Taylor has his sympathies, but then he referred to the grand jury verdict, and he said, look, it went through process, it went through the grand jury, and the grand jury decided not to indict. And instead of replying to that, when it came time for her reply, Harris just ignored that argument. She just ignored that argument. It would be so easy to say that grand juries will indict ham sandwiches if the prosecutor doesn't want to bring an indictment. And she should have said Taylor did not get justice because the prosecutors were unwilling to prosecute the police. That's what happened there. There was no justice there. She could easily have argued that, but she did not. Then Pence talks about somebody named Flora from Salt Lake City who was in the House tonight, whose beauty salon was burned to the ground during a riot. Then talk about implying that it was the protesters, the peaceful protesters, who burned down the salon. We have no idea who burned down that salon. Remember the incident in Minneapolis where somebody went along and broke all the windows at the Target store? And then it turned out he was a right-wing motorcyclist and part-time a policeman or something from a surrounding community who wanted to implicate the peaceful protesters. That kind of thing was going on all over the United States, especially with Trump encouraging the Proud Boys and the fascists to take unlawful action in the context of these protests. Where was Harris's defense in relation to that kind of thing? And then Pence talked about Tim Scott's bill that was filibustered by Harris, which was a random attack without very much detail that raised a new issue. Harris replied that says, she will not be lectured, she got on her high horse, she will not be lectured on enforcing the law, since she's the only one on the stage that has enforced the law that she enforced all through California. And then she accused Trump of refusing to condemn white supremacists, and Pence says not true. And he cited some cases where Trump did condemn the Ku Klux Klan, which he did a couple of times early in the administration before he got real brave about encouraging the fascists. But we know that basically what Harris was saying there is certainly correct. That is the big picture. We know it is true. Harris went on to Charlottesville and started talking about what happened in Charlottesville. I think that was a very justifiable response, and an effective response. But she has this tendency to get on her high horse whenever someone attacks her that in any way relates to law enforcement. Like, she's the world's expert on law enforcement. Don't you dare attack me. Of course, she fails to remember that she was knocked out of the presidential race because Tulsi took her apart on her law enforcement. Pence, fortunately for her, was not as capable of taking her apart. He should have memorized Tulsi's attack word by word and then handed her that. But anyway, Pence then replied by attacking the media and pointed to cases where Trump condemned the KKK, and then he attacked her for a prosecutorial record, specifically how she treated blacks in California, and said that Trump respects everyone. Well, that's not going to be credible. We all know the little respect in which Trump holds people. Oh, and by the way, what Pence then said to support the record of Trump in respecting everyone was to call attention to the fact that Trump has a Jewish grandson and that his daughter and his son-in-law, are Jewish. He neglected, but to mention that Trump also had the anti-Semitic Jew in his administration, Stephen Miller, who was a fascist if there ever was one. He's the guy partly responsible for the terrible treatment of the immigrants. Anyway, Harris says she served as Attorney General in California, and her work was a model for the whole country. And then it was a very, very, very bad model, which nobody is about to pursue any longer, at least not in democratically run states. Then she talked about what the Biden administration would do and what she did in California. And then she talked about systemic racism. So then we come to the final topic. Susan Page asked what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would do if Donald Trump refused a peaceful transfer of power. That is, if Biden and Harris were to win. And so she answered by naming all the Republican, the previous members, the Republican members of Bush's cabinet and the military senior officers who were all for Biden. But she never answered the question about what she and Biden would do. Susan Page then asked Pence what he would do if Trump refuses a peaceful transfer of power. And Trump answered by saying, they will win. So he didn't answer the question. Again, he didn't answer the question. I don't think he answered a direct question put to him one time throughout the whole debate. And he didn't even get a lecture from Susan Page about that. Right at the end, instead of summing up the whole thing and saying, well, Mr. Pence, you were a pretty effective debater tonight. I think you held your own about Harris in general from a technical point of view, of a debate, and you were pretty civil, except for the fact that you kept going over time, stealing more and more and more time away from Harris. But in spite of that, I can't close this debate without pointing out that you failed to answer a direct question from me nearly every time that I asked one, at least on 6 different occasions in this whole debate. You did not conform to the rules of the debate. You cheated. You cheated by going over time, and you cheated by not answering the questions that I asked. And I would be remiss if I failed to point that out. And if you think that's bias, you can go right ahead and thinking it. That's your opinion. But I have a right to state my opinion about how you acted in this particular debate. None of the questions were biased. They were all fair, and you should have answered fair questions directly instead of continually deflecting and dodging questions. She didn't say that. No, that's what she should have said. That's what happened. And if people recognize that, Harris should be declared the victor in the debate because she did do a better job of directly addressing the questions. Though she deflected a number of times herself, especially on the court docket question, because she and Biden are not prepared to argue out the court packing question now. But she needs to do it because she needs to get the public ready for court packing, as I'll be talking about tomorrow night in part. Susan Page closed with a question from an 8th grader who asked, if you folks can't get along, if you candidates can't get along, how can you expect us Americans to get along? Well, that's an easy one to answer. But anyway, they didn't answer it in a good way. Pence referred to Scalia and Ginsburg and their friendship. And then he referred to he and Harris being civil in the debate. And Harris then BS some and then gives reasons, but then gives as a reason that Joe Biden decided to run because of Charlottesville and the fact that he was so upset by the lack of civility shown in Charlottesville and by the rise of the fascists in Charlottesville. And then she also pointed to Joe Biden's record of bipartisan work in Congress, and she also said that he knows about tragedy and love and suffering, or words to that effect. And that's the way the debate ended, and the establishment was all relieved that, comparatively speaking, it was a peaceful debate. It barely touched on the key issues of climate change. There was no probing about climate change. Nobody was made uncomfortable by the questions about climate change. Again, climate change was neglected. Medicare for all was neglected. Page refused to ask any cutting questions concerning Medicare for all. Why? Because Susan Page is herself clearly biased against a Medicare for all approach. She would not put that on the table. She would not corner them on that. She would not corner them on progressive issues. She didn't treat one worse than the other, except maybe Harris a little bit worse. But that doesn't mean she covered the issues that are important to the American people, like free college, free health care at the point of service, really doing something about the climate in detail. No, she didn't do that. So this debate was disappointing. It spent very little time covering the real issues. It went into a bunch of things that people do not care about. It had far too much emphasis on tax cuts. And not enough emphasis on the economy and what people were going to do about it. And really, very little emphasis on the Republican failure currently to get a relief bill through. Very little emphasis on that. So the debate was a failure in that respect. Overall, I think the debate was a failure. From the standpoint of the competition, though, I think that Harris was probably the winner in the debate, and that the polling will probably show that, and that will might help somewhat in relation to the increase in Biden's lead. So that is what I have to say about it. And I'll now look at your comments. So I picked this up where Rob said, "Did you enjoy being lied to for an hour?" And Kay said the moderator took no real control again. Yeah, these moderators are incapable of taking real control. They're so used to licking the butts of the candidates that they cannot take control. They cannot treat a candidate with any kind of treatment that would suggest being rough. They just can't seem to do that. Chris Padavina said, Pence looks like a poorly reanimated corpse. Stone, bleach, the Botox just plain weird. I think Pence looks like his own fantasy of what a wealthy, white-haired senator is supposed to look like, which I think is what he originally set his cap for. But he never got to be a senator. He got as far, as governor, and then very unexpectedly he got the chance to be a vice president. But I think he was going for senator, and what the stereotype of a senator is supposed to be, as he learned what that particular stereotype is supposed to be. So, Kay says, hi, Evelina. Evelina says, hi, Kay. We seem to be walking the same way a lot. Laugh out loud. Kay says, yes, we sure do, Evelina. Kay says, I like watching it On the majority report, better laugh out loud. Kay said these moderators are useless. Susan Page was a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10 when what we need is an 11. I don't even know if she was a 6, but she was better than Chris Wallace. But of course, Chris Wallace had a much tougher job because she had to handle Donald Trump. Kay says Harris has her own baggage to carry with her because of her rump. Has Mnuchin spelling, yeah. There's no A in Mnuchin. It's just Mnuchin. The A seems to be there, but it's not there. Kay says, I really have little faith in any vaccines these days. Evelina says Susan was awful. Dolores Pierce says, I watched a debate on Tim Black live stream. He brought it to life. Yeah, he has a way of doing that. Okay. Also, Dolores Pierce says, I watched, Kay says, Dolores, I watched on the majority report. It was way better. Evelina said she lied badly about supporting homeowners when they were losing their homes. It was pretty unforgivable. She did lie badly about that. Evelina said she should have apologized for that. Yeah, but she was never pressed on that by either Susan Page or Pence. Kay says, I agree, Evelina. Evelina laughed. Kay says, we the people want Medicare for all. Okay, Dolores says, Biden for fracking. Against Green New Deal, against Medicare for all, but he believes in science, laugh out loud. Good. Yes, good, Dolores. Yeah, he doesn't believe in science very much, but he won't say that he doesn't believe in it. And Kay says, Los Angeles will be gone soon. Louisiana will be gone soon at the rate they have been getting hit this year. And Dolores says, Biden is Mr. Wall Street status quo, Joe, I know. Evelina says, really bothered me that Kamala kept saying they weren't going to stop fracking. She said it 2-3 times. I know. She was under orders. She was under orders from Biden to say that. That's his position. He wants people, he doesn't want to have people on the Republican side lying about his position on fracking because he doesn't want to be pushed into a position where he is viewed as having the same climate views as Bernie Sanders. He's desperately trying to avoid that. And Dolores says Biden and Harris are seeking the moderate Republicans. Yeah, they are. Evelina says when she should have been saying, you're not answering the question to Pence. Yep. As long as we get rid of Trump, it will be a huge step ahead. Kay says she sure wasn't my first choice for that ticket. She wasn't even my last choice for that ticket. I didn't want her anywhere near the presidency. But Dion Adams says the fly outperformed Harris. The fly? The fly? I never heard Pence being called the fly, but I don't think he outperformed Harris. Anyway, progressives were left out again. No surprise, though. Yeah, it was no surprise. Okay, I think that does it for tonight. Thanks for coming. I appreciate that at least a few of you were here. Tomorrow, I've got some very good stuff to come back to, much better than a debate, but I did feel something of an obligation to cover the debate. So that's why I covered it. For some reason today, the focus on my camera was not as sharp as it usually is. I don't know why. I have to double check that. I should be in better focus though tomorrow. Andy Eade says, thanks, Joe. Thank you for coming, Andy. And if there are no more questions, I'm going to say good night. And I'll see you tomorrow night. And I'll be posting a progressive short take tomorrow as well. Thank you.